Now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Professor Gina Neff. Gina is the Executive Director of the Minderoo Centre for Technology and Democracy at the University of Cambridge and Professor of Technology and Society at the University of Oxford. She's published several books, including Human-Centered Data Science this year with MIT Press. Her research focuses on the effects of the rapid expansion of our digital information environment on workers and workplaces and in our everyday lives. Thank you so much for joining us, Gina.
This is what technology and democracy gets you. It gets you multiple screens. We did all of this work to get here in person, so I could look there. It's great to see everyone. Lara, how are we doing online? We can, good. Just let me know if people online can't hear. Hello to those of you joining us hybrid. So I thank you, Neve, thank you. Jess, thank you to the libraries for the leadership on this issue. I am incredibly excited to be here and incredibly excited to see the work that we might be doing together. So one of the questions you might be asking yourself is, why on earth is someone who cares a lot about technology and democracy kicking off a conference, a day gathering on open research? So, of course, I too come with a researcher hat and having been an advocate and fan of building and sustaining these efforts in my own work. But I was, thank you. See what I'm saying about multiple screens? I'm really excited to see the themes of our conversations today about what's next, where's next, and how can we go further. And so I took this prompt from Bea and Neve of going further to think about my own talk with you. And I have simply 5 provocations that I hope will spark a conversation that we'll have in this session and will continue through our work. And that is, what can we do here at Cambridge? I'm assuming this is mainly a Cambridge conversation today, although we are going further. What can we do? How can we lead? And what are we going to do? And so I didn't know the postcard exercise, but I addressed my talk to us, right? And I include myself in that. So I'm going to be using our role and what we can do today. And oh yes, oh golly, now I really have to do. We said it would be arrows. Let's see. Yes. So my boldest and broadest provocation, but it shouldn't be surprising because I am wearing this hat of Professor of Technology and Society and Director of a Technology and Democracy Center, and I never mix those up. I mix those up every day. The boldest and the broadest of my provocation, but I think it is the one that has to be said, and it is the enormous elephant that is in the room with us today, is that we are in a particularly fragile moment where we as producers of knowledge, preservers of knowledge, keepers of publicness, have a role in preserving freedom and democracy. And so my biggest provocation for us to think about is one that must be said in terms of how we think about our information environment. Now, when I first made this plea, you might be able to hear from my accent that I am American. I hope you do not hold that against me. But in my North American institution, I was going to say more than a decade ago. Yes, more than a decade ago. I remember leading an effort around encouraging my faculty, my department, to take up open access publishing. So here we are, social science scholars of the digital, and in this phenomenal and incredible moment where we have the ability to disseminate our information far and wide. Research and experiments have shown that researchers who post about their research on social media, who create blog posts, who do this kind of work, get higher numbers of citations, right? There's a simple self-interested model. If we have this wonderful attention to getting the word out about our scholarship and about our data, we simply get more eyes on it. We create a different kind of conversation, right? That was the conversation we were having maybe 10, 15 years ago. And now we find ourselves in this moment of the relationship between technology, society, and information, where suddenly our belief in truth and facts as a collectivity seems quite fragile. At the same time, we're coming out wonderfully today in one of the first hybrid conferences that the libraries has helped to coordinate. We're coming out of the pandemic in a moment where we've been able to share information widely that makes it possible for us to be here. So these two things are connected very clearly through a rapid change in our information environment, which has threatened how we get information about the world. What is truth? What is facts? These things are not given. They are under attack, and they are part of a much larger ecosystem of information that we, as scholars, as academics, play a very small role in. And so my first of the provocations is that as we go forward to talk about the role of making the products and the inputs of our scholarship widely available, we are expanding the ways that people can interact with that knowledge. And for those of us from the social sciences who care deeply about the relationship between media and our democratic institutions, this link between information and the access to it and how people get that information is critical to where we're going to go in our online information environment. So that would be kind of the first thing that I think we need to remember, that the stakes of what we're doing here, right? It's something much bigger than any individual researcher's decision of where to publish, how to publish. It's much bigger than any individual library's role in preserving or archiving. It becomes one that is about what are our values in society and what is the relationship between the access to information in society and the ability to have a functioning and healthy society and democracy. And again, I'm going to do so. Let's call out the moment that we are in. It is no surprise to those of you who follow the news that we are in a fight against bad information. In the worlds in which I publish and work in, the role of the rise of studying mis and disinformation has become increasingly important for understanding how people navigate their information spaces. Now, clearly, not everything we do in the academy is directly related to larger political battles over mis and disinformation. And yet, the same pandemic that has brought us together in wonderful ways of coming together to create shared knowledge around the world, we have seen huge efforts around sharing what is bad information. So I would say that we all have an important role when we take on these questions of open research and open access. We have an important role to play in thinking through how our scholarship, politically relevant or not, helps to create an environment in which truth, knowledge, and those great, wonderful Renaissance values, those great, wonderful values that we have in the academy, how our work is part of that. This earlier this year, I worked with the Royal Society. Oh, sorry, this is cut off, but it just says the Royal Society there at the very end of this. Earlier this year, I worked with the Royal Society and Frank Kelly as our chair on a report on how the online information environment is changing science. And the report is a little grim. We conducted a series of focus groups throughout the pandemic with a series of scientists on different topics around how misinformation, bad information, wrong information online, and disinformation, intentionally wrong information online, how mis and disinformation is influencing their work as scientists. And the findings are stark. People are having a hard time connecting with colleagues. People are having a hard time getting good information out. People are having a hard time countering a public swell of misperceptions about incredibly important things in our world. Now, it's not my job here today to kind of walk you through that report, but I do want to say that, you know, we see that our commercially available online information environments, including social media, including all the ways that people are getting information around, are changing how people interact with the products of knowledge. Two of the key recommendations of this report were around electronic deposit and open access. That is, a group of scientists understanding the role of mis and disinformation, proposing recommendations to the government, understand there is no way to win a fight against bad information without ensuring that people have access to good. And that is my second provocation. Again, regardless of where our positions are vis-a-vis the 21st century even, we have this role to play in ensuring and standing up for what the academy can be, what it should be, and who our audiences are. I think this impacts, you know, we have learned that mis and disinformation is influencing how science gets done, how it is received by people, and who participates in science. And so expanding this finding that we did in this one report to a broader mission of what we're thinking about in the academy is perhaps our role as access to information and access to the outputs of research isn't about just one individual's research, although that's very important. It's certainly important to me as a researcher, as a scholar. But perhaps it is about maintaining the social institution of the academy itself. So that's my second provocation. We are fighting bad information with good, and in doing so, we are helping to protect and preserve the very mission of what's at stake in our work. The present. I'm not even sure what the present is at the present. I did not have I had a lot of things on my 2022 bingo card. I did not have wake up and check to see if one of the world's largest citizen journalism platforms is still functioning. For those of you who have not checked the news overnight, there is a not inconsequential risk that Twitter will collapse sometime within the next week. That's shocking. I'm sorry. How are we going to function? For many of us in the academy, Twitter has become our larger intellectual college. For some of us, no. But and maybe it won't collapse. But my point in our role in preserving the present is this. We are living in an incredibly fragile moment in our online information environment in which one of my colleagues, I wish I had made this up, but one of my colleagues put it as we are living in the dark ages. Now, I am aware that there are probably scholars of the dark ages sitting in the room, and I am definitely aware there are archivists in the room, and all of you are going, stay in your lane, Gina. But we are in a moment between two radically different media for archiving. And our assumption of what is happening with our digital record is that it is durable and it has a permanency. And I did not even think last week that Twitter would be gone by the end of 2022. However, the Library of Congress archived the first 11 years. Some of you, I see some wonderful nods. Some of you know this story, right? That the Library of Congress archived the text from Twitter from 2006 to 2017 when they stopped that process and then made their archives around single issue ones. I think we're not fully aware of how fragile the work that many people have relied upon to understanding the present is, how fragile that data are, and how fragile our ability to be able to go back and tell stories about the moment is resting on commercial interests. It feels like a public square. It feels like it will always be there. And it's those two powerful misperceptions that drive us for interacting in our social media environments, in our online information environments, that allow us to take off a bit of critical distance. How are we preserving this? Why should we preserve it? Why should it matter? I worked with the Library of Congress on a project to preserve the relics of the first .com bust. So if I'm guilty of this, as someone who literally took servers out of a law firm, went to court and argued that these servers should be maintained because they captured an incredibly critical moment in the history of the World Wide Web, of the commercial World Wide Web. And that through the Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison archive at the Library of Congress, will preserve the business history. It won't be opened in my lifetime, but it will be open to somebody. And it's this kind of moment where we assume that the kinds of information that's available online and available to us will continue to be there, that it becomes ever more important to have the conversations about how are we preserving our present, how are we preserving our work, and how are we making it possible for the scholars of the future. And maybe Twitter will be here when we get off the talk. I promised I wouldn't talk all the way to the next session because I want us to have a conversation. So my next provocation is open access and open research matter because of its role in expanding participation in knowledge. So one of the hats that I wear is as an advocate for self-tracking technologies, the N-of-1 studies that people engage with on a daily basis when they're tracking how many steps they take or how many how much exercise they've done. And we in the academy play an incredible role in ensuring that we expand who participates in co-creating knowledge with us. And this is one of the critically important reasons why the open research and open access to the outputs of research need to be part of the conversation. Because if we are just privileging and prioritizing those who have institutional privilege, those who come to questions with the stamp and imprimatur of officialness as scholars and researchers, we are leaving out not only generations of future researchers, we're leaving so many people behind. We're leaving out citizen scientists. We're leaving out journalists. We're leaving out advocates. We're leaving out thinkers who want to read and engage with our work. But more importantly, we may be leaving out our scholarly colleagues in parts of the world where commercial publishing has made it next to impossible to build international bridges to connect us. And so it behooves us, particularly sitting here and I mean here in this room and on this screen in this call, thank you, Zoom, it behooves us to sit here together in this incredible institution and think, what can we do to expand participation in the production of knowledge? And we can play an incredibly important role for that. Okay. I have to do it twice. Our responsibility to each other. My final provocation, I promise you. We have a responsibility to each other. And by that, I mean, we in this university have a responsibility to our early career researchers who are living increasingly precarious lives as they try to navigate and build an academic career and future. Our responsibility to one another extends to our students. It extends to our broader intellectual communities, our learning communities. It extends to the future generations of people that we train and work with. The stakes for open access cannot underestimate the importance of status-bearing work that young scholars, new scholars must take on. We have a responsibility to each other to make sure that the future, where open access and open research goes, works for those scholars who lack the privilege that I enjoy today of having a professorial title and sitting in a job at Cambridge. We absolutely must ensure that we're taking care of one another and we're making this workable and accessible to generations of scholars coming up. They're already dealing and struggling with enough. So let me tell you in bear with me, 3 quick minutes. Let me tell you just a little bit about what we're doing. Our work at the Minderoo Center, we are about 1.5 years old. We work to expand democratic approaches to digital technologies and build just digital futures through research, policy engagement, and capacity building, training and growing our capacity. We research, train, and convene academics, policymakers, civil society groups, and industry to bring positive change for humanity's relationship with digital societies and build into practice a democratic, fair, and just digital future. If you hear big normative statements in our mission statement, that is by design. So it's from the spirit that I have in the role and the work that I'm doing here at Cambridge that I'm trying to build a better digital future. I'm trying to build a just digital society. That's my mission. That's what I'm doing. I think open access and open research have a role to play in that. So if my provocations have seemed bold, they have come from a place where my work over here is about making sure digital society doesn't collapse. I don't know that I can say that about Twitter, but maybe just digital society. I'll work on that this week. Let's make sure that doesn't collapse. And I think we don't get there without the kinds of conversations that hopefully we're going to have today. So what do we do? What can we do? And again, I've organized this talk as a provocation to us in the room to start this conversation with us. And I have some ideas. Academics often have ideas. We know a lot about where we are with open access and open research. We have a certain legal framework that we're working within. We have a wonderful world leading library institution to help us think through this. We have a wonderful scholarly communication office here at Cambridge to help us think through this. We still need more, right? We need more core knowledge. What works? What evidence is working? What are best practices? What are the concepts, frameworks, and tools that we need to put in place? There's still a lot to be done, even on an issue that feels to me as, okay, we kind of know what to do. Well, we do, but we need to know more. We absolutely must be building solutions that work here at the University of Cambridge, but position Cambridge as a leader humbly as a leader on a global scale. And so we have to simultaneously work local and global. We have to simultaneously think about what is working for our institution, but how can this institution be one of the leading lights in the world? We have a lot of capacity for action that needs to be strengthened. So there are moments of wavering and wobbling in various parts of the ecosystem that supports open access and open research. There are wonderful things that we can get through regulation and through working with government. I, for one, am incredibly excited to see researcher access to social media data be on the agenda, as it is in the UK's forthcoming, still in the works, online safety bill. This is potentially, in my world and in my discipline, this is potentially groundbreaking, because having researcher access to data that was seen as being public and publicly shared, like a Twitter archive, allows us to ask very different kinds of questions than what's on stake today. So there's still capacity for strengthening. Organizations and departments have big roles to play, and individual researchers, especially through various different kinds of ways. And so Joanna Page, for instance, at Crash, is starting to convene a series of conversations about what would a researcher-led initiative in open access and open research look like in the humanities, where different kinds of products are important. And then finally, and I think this is the note that I'd like to end on, is, we really, to get further, we need researcher-led responses that address the needs for researchers across careers. So I'm giving you kind of these stakes that I think what we're doing here today is so important. It's so important to so many stakeholders who are not in the room. It's so important to this idea of our digital future. And frankly, it's so important for democracy. And yet, we're not going to get to a solution that works unless we put researchers at the center of helping to think through how we might go further. And so with that, I hope this will spark some conversations that we can have today. I think I'm going to stay here.
Perfect.
So I'll be on the mic.
Yep, that's perfect. Can I just check, Laura, if the people online can hear me? Yes. Excellent. And because there may be people in the room that, excuse me, need it for hearing reasons, and also because we have people online, please do wait for a microphone to come to you before asking your question. So does anybody have any questions for Gina? Gina, that was so thought-provoking, and I really do hope it sparks a conversation. Anybody have any questions to kick us off? Yes.
Hi. I express your concern about the preservation of all our interactions as scientists and as practicing scientists in social media. Over the last 2 weeks, there's been a massive move to the Fediverse, this Mastodon sort of apps. You must be aware of it. It's amazing to see how many scientists have moved there in the span of about 10 days. I wonder if you've been following this movement, and what is your, what do you think about it?
That's a great question. So what do we make of Mastodon? The kind of, I'm going to say anything goes, but a server-based response. It's protocol, really. It's not a company. And it harkens back to this very early idea that, even Jack Dorsey, one of the former CEO of Twitter, has said Twitter should have never been a company. It should have been a protocol, right? So it's a series of, Mastodon is in effect a series of protocols. It's not user-friendly. You have to make your way around. I think it's both a shining example of what's possible and also my vision of a nightmare. And I say this as a pretty dedicated Twitter user. Mastodon harkens for me back to early Web 1.0, what we refer to as the web before the rise of commercial social media companies, right? It is much more decentralized. It's much more open. You need to kind of navigate which server you're going to be on and where. You need to reconstitute and build these communities. And that's a really exciting space for people to be in. And we've seen many examples like that in communities. Why it's my nightmare is it's exactly the kind of space on the internet that pieces of legislation like the online safety bill is trying to ensure don't get out of hand. So when we have those big, open, decentralized spaces, they're great when we can make sure that the norms and rules of social interaction are maintained. They're very easy to troll, to abuse, to harm. I have a piece coming out in Wired at the end of the year that 2022 will be the year that women leave the internet. And it's a provocation, it's a short thing. But it's based on the work that we've done on AI-enabled intimate image abuse, and the work that we've done on the online safety bill, and then the work that many brave journalists and politicians who identify as female have experienced, the work that they've done by simply going online and daring to say something, to speak. So my fear of spaces like Mastodon is that when we have highly decentralized platforms like this one is, we lack the kind of guardrails that make participation open and safe. And that's why I think the world should look, and I kid you not, I'm not going to say this simply because of who our hosts are today. I think the world should look more like libraries than they do, Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, because librarians have, thank you all, each and every one of you, librarians have a mission for serving a community and serving people, not a mission of anything goes and allowing everything to happen, right? There are guardrails to enable that kind of thing, and driven by a deep sense of publicness. So on the one hand, I'm super excited to see that academic scientists have taken to Mastodon. On the other hand, I'm, in all fairness, like I'm on the board of a company that's going to build a different kind of solution, because I think that's the way to go forward, not one that's a little, not one that's more open, but one that actually has those guardrails in by design.
Thank you. I think we have time probably for certainly one more question, maybe to Steve up the back.
And while we're at it, could we get both questions and then?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fascinating talk. You made much of what you were talking about was access to knowledge. But of course, one of the problems that we're facing at the moment is, particularly for people in the global south or low and middle income companies, is the ability to participate in the dissemination of knowledge. I mean, essentially, they're all being priced out of the market, so they can read everything, but they cannot contribute to knowledge. So how do you think we can address this?
That's great.
Thanks, Steve. And Kaylin at the other side, Alexia.
Thank you so much for your keynote. I'm really interested in digital preservation and web archives, and involved in a project that's looking to archive the UK web domain, health-related content created in the last couple of years, and the role that libraries play in collecting information that is now false because research has moved on or it's outright fake news. And wondering if you could share your thoughts on that matter, because it is a really important collection to build. But of course, there are concerns around libraries providing access and contributing to the spread of disinformation, but also not wanting to intervene in the archival record either. Thank you.
I hope both of these questions are questions that we continue thinking about over the course of the day. I think the next session is specifically on what do we, how can we create and expand that participation in the dissemination of knowledge with the Global South. I absolutely agree. I don't think any researcher ever, dreamed as a little girl or a boy, like I want to grow up and create content for global media conglomerates for free. Like I want to create uncompensated content. And I want to do it through taxpayer money, like a model that's taxpayer money. And then they're going to have these profit margins that are among the biggest profit margins of any sector. You see my point. I think many people in the room would be aligned in this, that a model that simply says, let's pay our way in is not going to create that. And I think when we look at some of the most urgent problems in the world, especially around bringing in information about climate change and biodiversity, we absolutely need to make sure that we see research and participation. In my own space of thinking through the sociology of technology and media, sadly, the skew of papers around Twitter, for example, about Twitter, far outnumber papers about the other kinds of platforms in countries where we know we're having these information challenges. So I think it does work both ways. And yes, I am grateful that we have an archive and record of science from years gone by, right? So we can look to the past and see those crazy things they thought about in the dark ages of science. Yes, I am not against preserving mis and disinformation, but obviously we have to be incredibly careful in terms of how we platform and how we amplify. And those are two of the concepts that we've thought about in my field, right? Everyone has the right to express themselves. No one has the right to platform and amplification. And so when we create archives, we can do so in a way that doesn't necessarily contribute to the virality or the authenticity of information. And I'm sure that's something you struggle with a lot.
Thank you so much, Gina. Can I just check, Laura, are there any questions in the chat? No, that's good. I just want to make sure that our online participants have a chance as well. Can I ask everyone to please join me in thanking Gina for a really fantastic kickoff to today's speech? Thank you.
Thank you.